I don't have pay-per-view, so I can't watch boxing live, unfortunately. But I did listen to Anthony Joshua versus Alexander Usyk II on the radio last night. I think it was BBC Sports or one of the sports radio stations. Might have been Sky Sports, can't remember. So I caught sort of half of the fight onwards. Usyk has prevailed, and he truly, truly deserves credit. I mean, it's important to consider Alexander Usyk's not a huge heavyweight. Um, he's a smaller heavyweight. I think he started off as light heavyweight, in fact. For him to beat a big man like Anthony Joshua twice, really shows his mettle and his caliber. And to do this, with the weight on his shoulders, I mean, there's weight on every professional boxer's shoulders, but there could be few fighters who have gone into a world heavyweight championship fight whilst their country is fighting for its very survival from from the onslaught of a much larger neighbor. I mean, Alexander Usyk really, like so many great Ukrainian fighters, he personifies the courage of Ukraine. I don't think that's an exaggeration. I think this is like it's almost like the Lewis Schmeling fight in the 1930s, the two Lewis Schmeling fights, I should say, where there's so much that there's political overtones going on, not between Joshua and Usyk, but in the background. So enormous respect to Alexander Usyk. I think the guy is. Admittedly, I didn't follow him that closely until the first Joshua fight, but he really, really has. He's earned this, and huge respect to him. He will go down. He should rightfully go down as one of the great heavyweights, certainly of this generation. Um, I feel that when boxing historians look at the history of the sport, especially with heavyweights, they almost always gravitate to North American and British heavyweights, and especially Americans. But really, in the 21st century, the number of great heavyweights that have come from Eastern Europe, and particularly Ukraine, definitely the Klitschko brothers, that goes without saying, Alexander Usyk, and yeah, some Russians as well. They should all be mentioned in the annals of when we're talking about great heavyweight history, not just Americans and Britons and Canadians. So, I won't talk in great detail about the fight. Like I said, I didn't see it directly. I only followed it on radio. There were question marks over the location, of course, and I will address that because a lot of boxing fans won't. Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Rage on the Red Sea was the title that this fight was given. Um, should Saudi Arabia be hosting events like that? It's actually the second Joshua fight that has been in Saudi. Of course, his fight with Andy Ruiz back in 2019 was in, I think it was either Medina or Jeddah, but Saudi Arabia. Um, there's a lot of question marks over it. For example, apparently there was a women's fight last night actually on the same card, which is incredible when you think about it in a country like Saudi Arabia. But even I was actually looking at the footage of this. I was looking at the crowd. Were there any women among them? I know there's female boxing reporters like Christina Puncher and Michelle Joy Phelps, and they've sometimes been asked about, if boxing is in a country like this, can they do the job properly? Um, what about, I think Joshua's got a girlfriend, was she in attendance? So the very basic question, can women even be in attendance? I didn't see many women there. But there's the obvious issue of human rights. Now, a lot of boxing fans, quite honestly, don't really care. I do. I follow boxing and I am concerned. Human rights is something that's very, very important to me. A young British woman has just been sentenced to 35 years for using Twitter in Saudi Arabia. So I think the kingdom's trying to put out this image that it's reforming and it's changing. It still has a hell of a long way to go. And a bit like China and the Olympics, should oppressive regimes be given this platform? I'm not so sure that they should. There's someone like Eddie Hearn, the fighters themselves, they're not going to speak out against it because it's in their interest to, I mean, Joshua and Usyk aren't realistically going to say, "Oh, I refuse to fight here" at the last minute because of the human rights situation. And I'm not sure if it's up to boxers themselves. But promoters, yeah, I've got some issues about it, about giving a country like Saudi that sort of platform. There's plenty of other locations that don't need to be in the West. Why not another super fight in the Philippines? The thriller in Manila, after all, was one of the great fights of all time. Why not give it to the Philippines? Or not that their human rights is glowing either, but I just don't know about holding it in Saudi. I've personal misgivings about that. But leaving aside that issue, so Usyk got the fight on points. I didn't watch it all. Whether that was the actual action in the fight, it sounded like he was the aggressor. It sounded like he got most rounds. I want to talk a little bit about Joshua's tantrum afterwards. Now, this is attracting quite a lot of attention, and I've seen the footage now. Apparently, he stormed out of the ring in frustration. He got his belts. He threw them to the side. This was not Joshua's finest moment, if we're being honest. He made quite a bizarre speech. He was praising Usyk, but he also remonstrated with Usyk at one point where he said, "How is it that I'm bigger and I'm stronger? Strength wins in boxing. How did you beat me?" And Usyk was a little bit bemused by this. I don't think he quite knew what to say. He was sort of like thinking. I think he recognised that Joshua was having some sort of breakdown. Um, and I don't say that flippantly. I think Anthony Joshua was actually. It's almost like what Dillian White went through in their fight when he had that breakdown, when he was hitting after the bell and stuff. Or another example is, what was his name? It'll come to me in a second. He had a fight with Lennox Lewis. He was quite a prominent heavyweight in the 1990s. Might come to me in a minute, but there was a heavyweight then who basically had an in-ring breakdown and he refused to fight on. He was a very talented heavyweight, but and then there was a time that Andrew Golota just walked out of the ring in his fight with Tyson, and he got a lot of abuse for it. Um, the issue of mental health in boxing is a very, very critical one. Tyson Fury, to his credit, raised a lot of awareness of mental health, but um, I think what we saw there was basically emotions boiling over. Now, it was uncharacteristic of Joshua, and in retrospect, it was unfortunate. I don't think he should have done it. I think it was a bit disrespectful to Usyk to kind of take away his moment like that, especially when he was wearing the Ukrainian flag. And he had this bizarre sort of speech about heavyweights like Sonny Liston and Mike Tyson and Jack Dempsey. And then he said, "Oh, but people say don't throw combinations like Marciano." Well, I'm 18 stone, he was 14 stone. And it was a bit of a run. And then it got a bit cringy when he started, he was kind of praising Ukrainian fighters, but he was basically saying, "Oh, there was civil war, there was unrest. I don't know about the situation there, but it's not good." This is unfortunate because Joshua has actually he's apparently sent money to the Ukrainian cause. He's been like most sane people on the right side of things regarding Ukraine. But I think he should have just stopped talking at that point. It just got a bit cringy, and I think he had good intentions, but it didn't go down well. Usyk, of course, he's a man of faith. He thanked Jesus. It was a very inspiring speech. Alexander Usyk is a great sportsman, but I think it would be unfortunate if people go away and think Joshua is a big baby and he's a bad sportsman. I honestly think this was uncharacteristic. I've just watched a press conference with Eddie Hearn. Joshua was saying he wasn't angry with anyone else, he was angry with himself. Um, I don't think it was even intended as disrespect to Usyk. It's clear that, Anthony Joshua is a fighter that very, very rarely disrespects his opponents. He's not that sort of fighter. Um, he's not a Derek Chisora. He's not he's not that sort of fighter. A Shannon Briggs, Mike Tyson. He is a fighter who has consistently been a good sportsman. Consistently. And he certainly was in the Klitschko fight. So I just think this was an unfortunate spilling over of emotions. And in the end of the day, boxers are human. When you're in a training camp away from home, this is the point that they heard me in. People don't realize the sacrifice that boxers go through, especially at that level. I mean, Joshua and Usyk have such a weight of responsibility on their back. They've literally the expectations of nations on their back. Um, so I think Joshua was just frustrated at himself, and I think it spilled over. I think it spilled over. What happens now? It's probably not going to be a British super fight between Fury and Joshua, and that would be a great pity because that would have been one of the biggest fights of all time. The biggest fight absolutely in this country, but it's never going to happen, or it's unlikely to happen because the mechanics of boxing politics. Probably what will happen is Usyk, probably Fury will come out of retirement and fight Usyk. I guess it's possible if Fury beats Usyk. Something could happen for a Joshua fight to be set up. But Anthony Joshua doesn't have anything to be ashamed of, except possibly that tantrum last night. But his actual record is a very good one. I mean, there's no shame to losing to a man who, like Alexander Usyk, who's so good. Um, Anthony Joshua's elite. I mean, he will go down as one of our greatest ever heavyweights. Probably not the greatest, but he is absolutely in the top three with Tyson Fury and Lennox Lewis. Those three, Fury, Lewis, Joshua, are three greatest ever heavyweights. And maybe Joshua is second or third, but he's there. He will always be in that conversation. He's got nothing to be ashamed of at all. Um, and I just think that, these casual fans or these disrespectful fans who gloat about stuff like this, the man himself knew that he was wrong to do this. I just think it would be unfortunate if people remember that alone, because it really is uncharacteristic. Now, if Joshua was doing that after every fight, then I'd say, yeah, he's a he's a bad ambassador for the sport. But I really don't think that's the case. Um, and I'm still trying to remember the name of that fighter. In fact, if you just bear with me, because it was quite a famous incident actually. Um, but people need to know what heavyweight boxers go through. There needs to be a respect there. Any boxer, not just heavyweights. Um, just googling this now. Oliver McCall, that's him. Oliver McCall, yeah, he famously had an in-ring breakdown in his fight with Lennox Lewis. Uh, I think he had two fights with Lewis actually. He just basically refused to continue fighting, and he was crying. There was something clearly wrong. I think mental health is something that the pressure these men face is just immense, immense. And it can be extreme emotions of like the jubilation of winning a fight to the devastation of losing one. Eddie Hearn said something important. He said, ultimately, I want you to be happy. There's nothing in this life more important, and I think this should be true in sports as well. There's nothing more important than life. So the problem is when you have a sportsman or sportswoman who's dedicating so much and then they lose it, it can probably feel like the world's falling apart. But ultimately, nothing is more important than I think that there has to be support there, for fighters. There has to be. I've long felt there needs to be some sort of boxing trade union or something that Tyson Fury deserves credit for drawing awareness of this mental health issue. But so he's lost the fight. He's still accomplished an enormous amount, and I just hope he realizes that. Um, it'd be awful if Joshua went into a dark place after this. I mean, George Foreman after the Rumble in the Jungle did. And there's no other sport quite like boxing for this. It's a very cerebral sport. So I just think that, and you can't take that away. It's always going to be there. There's always going to be that mental pressure, but from the crowd, from your opponent, from everything. I mean, I had it, and my bout was, it was an amateur bout in front of 600 people, not a professional bout for a world heavyweight championship. I mean, it was 10,000 in Jeddah. Fights now in Britain that are seeing 70,000 crowds. I can't imagine. I can't imagine what's going on there. I think a big thing that's extremely important is that a fighter has to have a stable life outside the ring. If he or she has things going on outside the ring, it could be relationship problems, it could be anything. That it's going to be really traumatic. I think it's so important. Mental health in boxing, it is so extremely important that fighters have that support. If they're dealing with stuff outside the ring, they need to be given the support so that they're going into a fight with a clean head. So that if they lose, it doesn't boil over and it's not the end of the world. But Anthony Joshua has achieved great things, so has Alexander Usyk, and that's what I take from this. It's unfortunate that, that Joshua had that breakdown, but I think people should see that for what it is. I don't think this is just a disrespectful, unsportsmanlike guy. I really don't think that's an Anthony Joshua. I don't. I mean, it was wrong. He shouldn't have taken away Usyk's moment like that. But I think even Usyk understood what was going on there, and I think the fans should as well.